how can we come alongside pastors and not sort of shake our finger and, wag our finger at them and say you're doing it wrong, but put our arms around their shoulder and say, how you care about discipleship, you care about mission, you care about the Great Commission. How do we advance this conversation about the workplace where people are spending so much time?
Welcome to the Work Matters podcast, the podcast exploring the powerful connection between faith and work. Each episode features practical, real-life conversations around topics like Christian leadership, calling, workplace culture, entrepreneurship, spiritual growth, purpose-driven work, and what it means to honor God through your career and influence. So whether you're leading a business, serving customers, building spreadsheets, working in a factory, or simply want deeper meaning in your work, this podcast will encourage and inspire you to see your work as sacred and transformational. So let's dive in. Well, I can remember working for a fire security company, and I was a national sales account manager, and I can remember going into the office on Monday morning and thinking, man, I'm an imposter. I have an imposter syndrome. If they figured out I'm not that great, I just was doubting myself so much. And I just remember, I was at church the day before, and I don't ever remember hearing anything about how I was supposed to deal with that from a biblical perspective. And there was just this gap from Sunday morning sermon to Monday morning, my real life. And I love this quote that I just read, and it says this: I have become convinced that preaching with an eye toward workers is not only vital, but also one of the most effective ways that preachers can practically shepherd their congregations. And that quote comes from our guest today in his newly released book called Pastoring for Monday. I've got it right here. It's a great book. I'd like to welcome Matt Rusten. He's president of Made to Flourish to the Work Matters podcast. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Daryl. It's a joy to be with you today.
Matt not only serves as president of Made to Flourish, but is also the editor-in-chief of Common Good magazine. Matt earned a Doctor of Ministry in Faith, Work, Economics, and Vocation from Fuller Theological Seminary. He is a frequent writer and speaker and is the author of this new book I just mentioned, Pastoring for Monday. Matt is a leading voice in the faith and work movement and a champion of the church when it comes to discipling people for work. Matt, you are doing a really good work for the church, and we're just excited to talk to you today. And so here we go. We're going to dive in, Matt, with my first question. So from your vantage point with Made to Flourish and working with churches, how would you describe the current state of faith and work discipleship in the local church today? What is that like, Matt?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've been at this for the past 11 years or so. And I would say when I first began back in 2015, it was probably a newer conversation for many churches that we were working with and talking to. I would say on an encouraging front, 11 years later, it's much more common for a church to say, oh yeah, we've got something going on in that area, or we've been thinking about doing something in that area. And I would say the conversations that I have, and maybe these are just a couple different ways to approach the question you asked. Many churches have a desire to help workers in their church live out their faith in the context of their work, but don't exactly know how to do it. So there's a little bit of an idea to practice gap. Other churches that we work with, they might be doing something sporadically, but not consistently. They'll say something like, oh yeah, we do a Labor Day commissioning service or a Labor Day sermon, but it hasn't really been integrated across their ministry. And then the final thing that I see with a lot of churches is maybe there's one small area where they've thought about this. It's like a men's ministry that's doing some faith and work stuff or another part, but it hasn't been meaningfully, consistently brought to bear on the entire life of the church. So those are three ways that I think I'm encouraged by the desire that churches have to get going, take steps in this area, and those are some of the gaps we're seeing.
Yeah, and I was hoping to get to the gap question, because in our space, we work primarily with businesses, and churches has always been kind of that mysterious world that we don't really understand, and yet with our pastoral experience, we don't want to give up on. We don't want to get frustrated and say, we just can't step into that or participate in that. But I do wonder, just in one-off conversations, there is a bit of resistance sometimes that I sense from pastors and staffs. Have you encountered that too, or is there a common resistance beyond the gaps that you described that churches have to kind of leaning into workplace discipleship?
So, Daryl, it's a good question. And I want to just start by saying I've served as a pastor. I've been on that side of the desk where you're getting all kinds of requests from each angle, right? Care about this issue, care about this issue, care about this thing. So I understand that pastors have to sort of be discerning, and not that they have a filter, but they're getting a lot of requests from a lot of areas. I think a lot of pastors are asking the question, are you asking me to start a lot of new programs? Are you asking me to invest a lot of different money and things like that? And what I would say to that pastor and maybe people that are asking that questions is, this is not necessarily adding a lot of new things to your schedule. It may not involve investing a lot of new money or hiring new staff. I think you can take some meaningful steps wherever you're at with the things you're currently doing, and you're just paying attention to this conversation of how do the things we're doing apply to regular workers. And the thing, I have this conversation with a lot of pastors, and it's just this comment that where is the primary place, just by sheer number of hours, that people are following Jesus? We are, as pastors, we're people who love the Great Commission, right? That we're making disciples of all nations. We're teaching them to obey Jesus in everything that he commanded. And the follow-up question is, where are they learning to follow Jesus and everything he commanded? Well, paid or unpaid, it's in the places where they labor, where they work, where they contribute. And I just want to say, as we're starting this conversation, that the way that we talk about work, the way we talk about work with our pastors, it's not just paid work. It's anywhere where people are contributing. We say work is contribution, not compensation. So this is a conversation for everyone.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
I appreciate that. At Work Matters, we talk a lot about the fact that our churches do such a good job of discipling for marriage, discipling for parenting, discipling for
finances,
studying, reading the Bible on a daily basis. But when it comes to work, which we're spending, half of our adult lives, there's very little discipleship occurring. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, again, I think you're probably right in that reflection that the ways that the church has really paid attention to finance, to marriage, and there are a lot of ministries that have sprung up in those areas, right? People like Dave Ramsey in the area of finance, or Crown Financial Ministries, or other areas. I would say in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been an uprising specifically around the conversation of entrepreneurship. I see that as really positive, that there's a lot of tools, a lot of good organizations that are helping churches raise the bar in that area. But as you think about just the regular folks, just the regular people that attend church, faith and work has traditionally been a faith and business conversation. But what we're finding in a lot of churches is business sometimes is a significant category, but it may not even be a top 5. In a lot of suburban churches, you have a lot of stay-at-home parents. In a lot of churches that we work with, education will be on the top 5. People working in healthcare will be in the top 5. And then you start getting into accountants, people in HR, people in finance, and things like that. So we're asking really that pastors, first of all, learn who's in your congregation. Where are they spending their time on Monday? And how does that impact the way that you're speaking to this issue?
I think it'd be helpful at this point for our listeners to hear more about Made to Flourish.
Yeah,
you could just kind of tell us about that and just drill down into some of the specifics and how you guys engage churches in this whole topic.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl. We were launched, as I mentioned, in 2015. And at the time, we had heard research from a guy named David Miller out of Princeton. And he had logged over 1,000 faith and work organizations across the country. So in every city, in every community of any size, there's usually one or two things going on in that area. Some are just little tiny mom and pop shops. Some are significant ministries like Work Matters. So we had to ask ourselves the question, does the world really need one more faith and work organization? And at one level, the answer could have been no. We think that, it's kind of been covered. There's a ton of awesome work going on out there. But what we saw is that this conversation had not meaningfully penetrated and been a part of the church. I love the work that you guys are doing. I love the work that so many of my friends who are leading organizations are leading. The reality, though, is the vast majority of people in a church are never going to attend a special event or even learn about a ministry, but they are going to show up at their church on Sunday. So we just felt like if this conversation matters, that's an arena that we can't overlook. And how can we come alongside pastors and not sort of shake our finger and wag our finger at them and say you're doing it wrong, but put our arms around their shoulder and say, you care about discipleship, you care about mission, you care about the Great Commission. How do we advance this conversation about the workplace where people are spending so much time? So that's why we were launched. That's what our work is about. We really come alongside churches in three ways: through ideas, through training, and through multiplying leaders. So on the ideas front, we launched a magazine called Common Good Magazine, which Brandon mentioned earlier. And that is our way of taking this very timeless theology, this biblical theology of work that does not change, but applying it to new issues that are coming out, telling new stories about the ways that workers are applying this theology in their work. And that magazine goes out not just to pastors, it does go out to about 15,000 pastors. But anyone can have a description. And our goal with that magazine is that you would be informed, you'd be conversant, you'd be following along with trends of how faith and work is meeting people. So that's our magazine. But as I mentioned before, a lot of churches will then say, that's great, I understand the ideas. What would we do? So that's where we come alongside with training. We have a training program called our Church Practicum, and there's a tool that we've created called Scatter. I mentioned earlier the data that, most churches, what are their top workers? And the tool Scatter allows a church to take stock of where are our people on Monday? And what does that mean for the way that we approach this issue? So we provide training that way, both the tool, but a training workshop that we do called the Church Practicum. And then we offer a program that's something that I got to benefit from. So when I graduated from seminary, I was not very well acquainted with the faith and work conversation. I'd maybe heard a little bit about it. I'd maybe read one book or something like that. But I was a part of a pastoral residency program for 2 years. Think about it as being like a full-time pastor where you're being mentored and trained as you begin in ministry. But I was in a church that deeply valued this conversation. And guess what happened to me as a young pastor? I just thought this is what it meant to pastor, is to care about these issues inside the church. And I not only saw a church that was modeling that, I saw the beautiful lives of people in the congregation who were confident about their sense of calling, their sense of ministry, whether they were working on the factory floor or whether they were leading a large company or a nonprofit, whatever it would be. And that just became so compelling to me as a young pastor. So let me bring it home here. We help churches start pastoral residency programs that are living out this DNA. We call it our Pastoral Residency Accelerator. So we could be doing a lot of things, but those are the 3 ways that we've decided we could make an impact: through our magazine, Common Good, through our Scatter tool and the training, our Church Practicum, and then through this multiplying young pastoral leaders who are in churches that value these things.
I love that. When a church says yes to you, and says yes to wanting to disciple for work and make this a part of their DNA and a part of their Sunday morning conversation and a part of their small group curriculum. When they do that, what happens to that church? What have you seen happen?
Let me start with the church that I started in that I just talked about, the residency program. They were one of the early leaders in the faith and work movement. I know there's some great churches in the Northwest Arkansas area that are doing some amazing things kind of in your guys' backyard as well. But they were one of the early leaders in that. And what was interesting is that when people would go to their website, they heard that they were kind of the faith and work church. They wouldn't necessarily see a program. They wouldn't necessarily see it front and center. It was a part, though, of everything that happened. And I would say there were really three areas where it came about. It came about in the worship gathering, your Sunday service. It was meaningfully integrated into their discipleship pathways, and it came out in their mission and their outreach and the partners that they chose. So, for instance, on the worship gathering, they would do something called a This Time Tomorrow interview, where on a regular basis, they would pick someone from the congregation and they would bring them up to interview them for 5 minutes. And they would say, hey, John, or hey, Susie, can you give us a picture of your work? What are you doing this time tomorrow? And then they would say, how is that work that you do? How is that a unique opportunity to love and serve your neighbor? Where do you see the brokenness of the world, your own sin, the sin of others as you interact with that? And then finally, how can we be praying for you? And by the way, John, or by the way, Susie, you're an educator, but right now we want every educator. Would you stand? You are a minister of God in that place. You are a priest in that parish, if you want to use that language, and we are commissioning you to do the work that God has called you to do. So that's just a small thing. It didn't require a new budget. It didn't require a lot of money. It didn't really require money at all. It took intentionality out of a church. They also began auditing their language. So when they talked about words like ministry or calling, this wasn't just the things that pastors or missionaries did. These were words that we used for all of God's people. So people start to reorient what we even mean when we're talking about doing the work of ministry or things like that. So that was just one example of the worship gathering. We help churches think through from the opening welcome to the songs that they sing, to the prayers that they pray, to the sermons they preach, to the benediction they give, kind of the regular liturgy, whatever that looks like at your church. How does this inform your worship gathering? We then do that same thing with the discipleship and with the outreach of the church. So we really want churches to form a plan. We don't tell churches what to do. We're not programmatic in that way, but we do want them to make an intentional plan about how they're going to integrate these ideas into the life of the church.
You make me want to go back and pastor again.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
I want to get it right
I missed
this time.
It my first time around too. I totally did. One thing you and I've talked about, and I know you got a question following this, but we joke all the time. I give Brad, my pastor, I give him a hard time all the time because every time that we celebrate somebody up front on Sunday morning, it's always the person that is sacrificing themselves by serving in the children's ministry or on the welcome team. And that is the great work, and let's celebrate them. Or it's the missionary, right, that's in town. And I was giving him a hard time. I'm like, hey, by the way, Joy makes a great cup of coffee up at the coffee shop up the road, and she does it with a great smile and with dignity, and is one of the best employees that coffee shop has ever had, and is honoring God in her work. You should totally stand her up and applaud her. Let's do that. Let's do that.
Yeah, I love that This Time Tomorrow. That's a fantastic.
That church that is lifting up the missionary and the pastor, awesome. Keep doing that. What an amazing sacrifice. What amazing work they're doing. And to your point, Brandon, can we look for other people who are in their ordinary lives following Jesus and making him known and showing the light of Christ? That my friend Isaac tells the story of he was ministering in a church as a pastor, and they had brought up one of their people from the congregation. And he had been in finance, kind of in the investment world. And they basically said, I'll make up a name for him, but they said, John has been working in finance at this local bank, and he's been working hard. But then John heard God's call. And now he's going to Guatemala, and he's going to be a missionary. So we want to pray for John. Well, a couple things were true of John. When John went to Guatemala, he was actually helping people in that area of the country, with microfinance and loans and starting businesses. So the very thing that he was just doing in another place with a way that could help that. But you think you're in that congregation, and what are you hearing? You're hearing, you know what? He wasn't obedient to God's call, but now this thing over there somewhere, that's God's call. And what if you're the person in that pew that's still in finance? You're still in banking. You might be hearing, I actually haven't heard God's call, or I'm not obedient to God's call, when in fact, it might be exactly the place where God has called them to be. Listen, we love that verse in Acts chapter 1, right? That we're to go to the ends of the earth, but we also need God's people in Bethlehem and Judea and Samaria, the areas right around us. So it's not an either or, it's a both and.
We talk often of how work is a formative thing in us, that we're becoming someone at work. And so I'm curious, how has your work shaped you? What's going on in your heart and life as you live out your work every day?
It can, you might get the idea that when we're talking about faith and work, it's all about victory and being, witnesses for Christ and sort of advancing his kingdom, sort of this language. Much of, I think, how we're formed at work, and this is a topic for pastors, is we can come to the end of ourselves. We see our own brokenness. We see our own need for the gospel. We see our own need to cry out for help. In this last year, we were going through a really hard set of things, and nothing was wrong, but it was like a really big challenge, and we weren't getting the traction that we wanted. And I just noticed that I was waking up every day at like 4 a.m. with my mind just racing. I don't know if you've ever been in a season of work like that, where like you can barely, I had an easy time falling asleep, but I was waking up early and I could not get back to sleep because my mind was going. And guess what? That's a faith and work conversation too, because I think in my best moments, and if I'm remembering this conversation, I'm crying out to God. I'm reaffirming my trust. I'm confessing my weakness. I'm confessing if I've not representing him correctly. And you look back on some of those really difficult times, and you can see God's fingerprint that God was doing something in me there. He was causing me to grow, to learn to trust him, to surrender my will to his. So, I think that's one obvious way. I think another way is so that those are the things that happen to us and we need to respond. I think there are intentional ways that followers of Christ can actually think about their everyday habits and rhythms and think of ways that actually you can integrate disciplines and spiritual practices into your regular workday. So this is something that I did for a little bit, and I do this off and on, is actually my morning commute. I realized that I wanted to be more aware of God's presence throughout the day. So as I was driving into the work, I said it has to be really simple and I have to be able to remember it. And so I just developed 5 S's on my 15-minute commute. The first S was just silence. I'm just trying to say, God, help me be mindful of you and just quiet my mind. Secondly, I would have a scripture queued up on my, just that would play over my radio. So I would play the scripture on YouVersion, and I would be thinking through that. Then I would usually have a song queued up, and when I'd hit a red light, I would go to that song and I would play it, and I would try to sing it out loud on my way to work. And then I finally got to the parking lot, and I would look at my 4th S, my schedule. And I would just be going through that meeting, and I've got that thing going on. Oh, I've got that. That's a hard conversation coming up. God, would you give that person patience? Would you give me wisdom to know how to handle that? And then as I'm walking into the office, the 5th S is just staff. And these are not like out loud prayers. These are, I call them Nehemiah prayers. Mm-hmm. We're told in the first chapter of Nehemiah that he's about to go see the king, and it says Nehemiah prayed. How long was that prayer? Like 2 seconds? Lord help me. But I'm authoring Nehemiah prayers for the people that I'm seeing in the workplace. Oh, there's Bethany, there's Kevin, there's Johnny. God, would you strengthen them today? So I think some of those liturgies or those practices that we actually integrate with our workday can be meaningful, and they can actually deeply shape us over the long haul.
Great example. Thank you. Yeah. That your first analogy of the difficult things, you reminded me of Eugene Peterson's translation of the Beatitudes. And he says, you're blessed when you're at the end of your rope, because then you have more room for God and his rule. And yeah, those end of the rope moments are times in which we can definitely lean into him and who he is. And many of those happen as a result or adjacent to our work. So thanks for bringing that up.
And sometimes it's just a matter of, for a pastor, they've read that verse in the Message, Eugene Peterson's commentary on the Beatitudes there, and it's just something as simple as naming it. That pastor might have a reflex to say, oh, you've come to the end of rope in marriage, or you're going through a difficult situation with your child. But what does it look like when people come to the end of their rope at work? Well, a pastor looking out the congregation, there might be 40 people that have come to the end of their rope at work. So you're naming that, you're calling it out, and you're helping people make those connections.
Matt, this has been an awesome conversation. I love the work you guys are doing and your heart for the church. We share that collectively as an organization with you guys. We love that you're helping churches see that work is a part of the spiritual formation of their people, right? That God is forming them and forming us more into the image of His Son in work, at work, and through work. And spiritual discipline is such an active part of that. Daryl writes a lot about that as well. I love all of that. So I want to wrap up with a question. So our listeners are listening to this on their way to their job or on their way home. And it's a Friday and they're getting ready and they're thinking about church and they just heard this. What's a 1, 2, 3 things that they could do as a member of their church to help their church and even their pastor move towards discipleship of work and that being more a part of their church? What could they do? They're not the pastor, but they're the member of their church. What could they do?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is to not come with a posture of critique or you're doing it wrong. Pastor, I've been sort of fed up with this and you don't see me, and to come with a critical heart. I think instead to come with a curious heart and to basically say, I've been learning some content in my life, or I heard this podcast and, Brandon and Daryl, they've just been really encouraging me, and to connect it with something that the church already cares about. To say, hey, I know at this place that we make disciples who follow Jesus in all of life. I've realized a place that I need more help with that, and I'd love to think more deeply, is in my work. Would you be open to helping me think about how we could do that? If there are ways that the church could support me in that, or I can be an advocate for that in my small group. So if you come with a posture of, I know you care deeply about kind of a deeper level issue, and I'm willing to help, and is there anything that we can do? And then I would encourage you to say, what are resources that you've grown from, that you've benefited from, and to share those. Share the Work Matters podcast, maybe a particular episode that you really loved, and to say, hey, this really stood out to me. This helped me. I'd love to encourage you with it. And I, selfishly, I would say point them to Made to Flourish. That is our work, is to work with pastors. If a pastor goes on our website, we'll send them a free resource box, and, no strings attached, not asking anything, but we want to bless your pastor, your church leader, with those resources. So those are a couple steps.
Yeah. And then I want to add one more to the end of that, of what you just said, and that's go ahead and buy Matt's book and gift it to your pastor.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, go ahead. Buy his book and gift it to your pastor, and then say, hey, I'd love to go through this book with you. I'd love to read it with you and get your thoughts on it. But I think that's definitely something that our listeners need to do. And so with that, Matt, where can our listeners go to learn more about Made to Flourish, and where can they go to buy your book?
Yeah, so it's real simple on both those accounts, madetoflourish.org. So madetoflourish.org, and go around our website. You'll see some of the activities that I mentioned earlier. You can subscribe to Common to Good magazine. Anyone can do that. You can get a free gift on our website if you go and find that. Books, I imagine your audience knows where to find books, and my book is available anywhere where people find books. So Amazon.com. Also, it's published with InterVarsity Press. You can go on the InterVarsity Press website if you choose to go that route as well. So thanks for saying a word about that, and should be easy to find with a quick search on the web.
I love it. Matt, thank you so much for being on the Work Matters podcast today. And to our listeners out there, I just want to encourage you, we love the church. I mean, it is Christ's bride, right? And so let's continue to invest where we are in our local church and grow in the discipleship of work. Matt, thanks for being on.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Daryl. Great to be with you guys today.
Thanks for joining us on the Work Matters podcast. I want to invite you to take the next step today in living out your faith through your work by taking our online course, the Work Matters Institute. This transformational 10-session faith and work course helps Christians connect Sunday faith to Monday work through practical teaching, spiritual formation, leadership development, and discipleship for the workplace. Taking this course will equip you to live and lead with greater clarity, purpose, integrity, and influence. To learn more or start the course today, visit workmatters.org because God is at work in every kind of work.